Um, Hi everybody. How's it going? We're gonna get going here in just a second. I'm just gonna give it till, maybe like another 10, 20 seconds, but I'm happy to see so many of you here already. Just one second. I'm just gonna get a couple links pulled up that I'm gonna share at some point. Okay. Going for it. So today we're going to be talking about how to fund your graduate education. This is kind of one of those topics that everybody's curious about, but doesn't necessarily know how to broach, particularly if you haven't started your graduate education yet, you haven't sort of been enmeshed in the world of research and seen how kind of common and necessary it is to discuss funding, and have transparency around funding. So, we're going to kind of have just a broad overview to kind of how the funding process works in graduate school, and maybe a couple examples of how folks can go about negotiating and looking for funding. So, my name is Michael Decker. I am the director of graduate student support programming here. And the College of Graduate Studies at the University of Idaho. So, just a little bit of context, the College of Graduate Studies is the umbrella college that all graduate programs sort of live within. So, we are the graduate degree granting college. So, when if you were to come to UI, or maybe some of you are already here at the University of Idaho, um, we are the college that actually will kind of present and award you with a degree. We are also the college that allocates teaching assistantships. Now, I'll get into that in a little bit, in just a little bit. That doesn't mean that we necessarily are the ones that choose who gets assistantships. It means that we are the college that oversees how assistantships are appropriated to colleges. Um, and maybe I should get into kind of the nuance of what I mean by colleges. So by college, I don't mean the college, which is the University of Idaho. It's that there's the College of Natural Resources, or there's the College of Liberal Arts and Social Sciences, or the College of Science, right? These are different units within the broader university structure, right? So just kind of jumping in though. Um, so. Uh, a couple of like quick things before we get going, in terms of is funding available for the program that you're looking at going into. It usually depends based on the type of degree that you are going to be seeking, right? So a lot of research-based PhD programs um, have some funding associated with them typically. And I usually recommend that people who are doing research-based PhD programs should have funding because for many reasons, because it's often nearly impossible, I think, to be doing one of those and to also be maintaining a full-time job. Um, and then, oh, Amanda, are you frozen? Oh, oh, okay, okay, I'm good, right? Okay, I saw that Amanda was frozen. Amanda's uh our graduate assistant here in Cogs, and so I wanted to make sure that I wasn't the one that was frozen. Okay, so. Yeah, so if you're doing like a research-based PhD program, like you should find funding, right? Because funding basically makes sure you can pay your rent and that you can live, right, while you're doing a PhD program, because you aren't going to have time to have a full-time job. Now, there are other degree types, like some of our non-thesis professional-based programs, where the expectation for some of them is almost that you will be working professional while you're attending these programs. Many people, work for school districts or they work for government agencies, and they're really just fulfilling that degree as kind of maybe they've hit some sort of a hiring plateau and they just need the degree in order to kind of get to a new place. In which case it's kind of viewed as an investment, and there is less funding associated with those types of degrees. Um, Another thing too is that you will have to actively seek out funding. Now, that's kind of a nuanced statement that I just made in that not all programs require you to like uh, secure that funding before applying, and they don't necessarily require you to fill out a separate application for the funding itself. Now, that being said, I do highly suggest that you make contact with the department before you apply and ask if you're considered for funding at time of application, right? And so a really good place to start, and I'm going to pop this into the chat really fast. And you're gonna see me. I'm gonna bring up this URL several times while we are talking today. And this is our UI graduate programs offered page. Now, if you go in, and actually, I'm gonna really quickly, I'm gonna go off script here really fast. I'm gonna unshare my screen and then I'm gonna reshare my screen because I want to show you. Um, one second. I'm going to show you what this page looks like. Okay. Amanda, you can see that? Okay, great. So this is a really good page. And so the URL is in the chat right now. So you can just go to, so let's just say I was interested in natural resources and I don't know where to start, right? I'm like, where do I even begin? Um, having a conversation about attending this program, whether I can be considered for funding at time of application, et cetera, et cetera. You would, click on the natural resources page here, like you saw, it's an alphabetized index. And then both of these numbers right here. So you see we have Carrie's number right here. Carrie's super nice. And we also have their graduate studies office. And you're going to talk to either JC or Elise if you're interested in that program. Those are their administrative workers in their graduate studies office, right? Those are great places to start having these conversations. And those are great people to talk to if you're interested in getting connected with faculty members who may have similar research interests to your own. Now from here, there's another link that you can click, and that's this academic program information. So you can click on academic program information, and then and we'll get into this in a minute, right? Like, if you're also looking for people to reach out to, you can go to their faculty list, and they have all of their faculty who work in the department right here. And my recommendation to you is do research on who teaches in the department and read publications that they have put out recently. And do that before you, ask for funding, right? Make sure you've done your research. Make sure that you align yourself with their departmental interests. So. I wanted to just get that out of the way. I'm going to talk about that index several times throughout this presentation because I think that it is important. It is one of the most important resources we have just for general navigation. Um, there's also no need-based federal aid at the graduate level, and that's something that you need to consider. And so that means there's no subsidized loans like there is at the undergraduate level, and there's also no Pell Grant. Right. So the Pell Grant is something that a lot of people who are classified as being, from a certain economic income bracket get at the undergraduate level that helps pay for tuition and books and just general cost of education. You do not get that at the graduate level. So these are things to keep in mind that sometimes kind of blindsides people. And then funding can come from internal or external sources, and we're going to talk about both of those here in just a moment. Um, let's see here. Okay. So yeah, I want to say that it is possible to make it through your graduate program without paying out of pocket. And I think that for many programs, that is the best way to do it. Right. It's not, if you're getting a degree in English literature, right, it's not necessarily a good investment necessarily to pay a ton of money out of pocket or to go into a bunch of debt, right, for that degree. Now, that being said, we do have folks like I mentioned before who maybe they're doing like a Master of Engineering, in which case those are kind of safer investments, and we do see people paying out of pocket or even taking out some loan money for those degrees because there's a kind of very direct ROI, a return on investment that people get from those kinds of programs, right? So remember that it takes a ton of time too. Like I don't suggest if you're looking for funding, I don't suggest applying, um, you know, I don't suggest doing the whole process in a month, right? If you're looking for funding, the process can take, to like I said, be researching faculty members, be researching programs, to understand their funding structure. It can take 6 months to a year sometimes, right? To kind of fully put all those pieces together. And I suggest giving yourself as much breathing room as possible. And then understand any sources of funding and how those may impact your actual research itself, right? So some people they don't want to do a teaching assistantship because it doesn't fit in with maybe they have no desire to go into a teaching based career and it would just hinder their research. And so they're really looking for perhaps a research assistantship that's more aligned with their actual research outcomes. And we'll get into the difference between TAs and RAs here in a moment. And then just generally be a self-advocate throughout this entire process. I think that sometimes, it's easy to be a little bit bashful or a little bit shy and think that you're being imposing or annoying. And really, it's up to you to advocate for yourself because that's one thing that like I know I learned pretty quickly when I was in graduate school is that everybody wants funding, right? And none of it is need based, right? It's like I said, like going back to like the Pell Grant, right? Like there are a lot of sort of institutional um uh and by institutional I mean like not just our institution but sort of like the government, right? There are these sort of safeguards that are in place that are need based and those kind of go away at the graduate level. And it really is who has the skills and the ability to kind of advocate for themselves the best. There's almost a kind of like social Darwinian component. It's not good. I don't like that. I'm just saying like that is the truth, and how a lot of departments sort of run this. And I think that in our office would be happy to help you navigate that. And that's definitely why we're having presentations like this, is we want you to understand sort of how it works. So. Let's talk about what assistantships are. Okay, so this is so like forgive me if you're somebody who is like totally up to date on this. Like, just bear with me. I'm just going to talk about this for a moment. So, so there's this sort of larger term which is graduate assistantship, but there's really three kinds of assistantships that fit into that larger taxonomy, and that is teaching assistantships, then research assistantships and support assistantships. Support assistantships are a little bit, we don't see as many of those. So I think Amanda, technically you're a support assistant, right? And you might be the only support assistant that I know of at the whole university. There may be others. I just don't know of any others. But usually it's going to be a teaching or a research assistantship. And I think we have, let's see here. I'm gonna skip ahead, then I'll skip back. So this is the difference between a TA and an RA. TAs, they're both about 20 hours per week. You'll see, it's pretty uncommon for TAs or RAs to be different hours than 20. Is usually 20. The expectation being that like you probably put in 20 hours of your job and then about 20 hours on your research, and that's a full-time job. Now, that being said, that's not always the case. Sometimes people work a lot more, a lot less than that, and it varies quite a bit. But generally, your contracts will be for about 20 hours a week, and you will. In the case of a TA, you'll oftentimes teach courses, design courses, prep and grade exams. Um, you'll lead labs. Really that's great for folks who, well, I mean, if you just need funding, right, you can do it just because it gets you funded and tuition remission, and a small paycheck. But also, I know in my case, when I did a teaching assistantship in graduate school, it gave me really good experience teaching, right? Some people are just like, how do I even get experience? How do I get that 2 to 5 years experience that they want when you enter into the workforce? So this is a great way to do it, right? And then RAs, it's different, and really it's like futile to even put bullet points here because it's so expansive what an RA can do. But like, some examples are types of lab work, statistical modeling, helping in preparing grant materials. But really, the idea is that oftentimes an RA is that somebody has written a grant and they've written in money for a graduate student to help fulfill some of the obligations or the outcomes of that grant. And you're going to help fulfill that. That's what your job will be. Um, so, but they kind of, like I said, both of those just sort of fit into this larger structure of graduate assistantship, which is just 10 to 20 hours of work a week helping provide some form of assistance for either a department or a faculty member. Okay. Um, they typically include, so there's a ton of variability in what assistantships offer. So stipends can range from 10 to like 40K a year. Those are like the really good ones. And the 40K a year ones are typically research assistantships. We don't have any TA position that is going to make you that much. And so this number, this 10 should actually be updated. I think there may be certain assistantships that like are outside of my line of sight. But we've actually since I think raised it to about 15 is the minimum pay that a TA can get if they're coming through COGS. They're a COGS appointed teaching assistantship. Um, and so it should really say like 15 to 40 is what that should say. They typically come with a tuition remission. That means that your tuition is waived. Or it's not, I mean it's waived on paper. We pay it. And then some also include health insurance as well. So the student health insurance plan will be covered underneath certain assistantships. But what I want to remind you is if you do get an offer for a graduate assistantship to read the offer letter because there is, like I said, a ton of variability. Some come with insurance, some don't come with insurance. Some get paid this much, some get paid another amount. Some are for 20 hours a week, some are for a different amount of time than that, right? So it's like you just need to read the offer letter. That is truly one of the most important that like sometimes people you're so excited you just kind of sign and then but you really should kind of read the details and understand what you're being supported for. So um how do I get how do you get one? How does one go about getting an assistantship? So like I said, we we give it to departments. We're like, departments, here's how many assistantships you get. You decide how you're going to get them. So sometimes there will be individual faculty members who oversee a certain assistantship. Okay, how do you find out if who those faculty members are? Oftentimes by just calling those numbers that I showed you on the department page and having a conversation with them and understanding that information, right? Um, you know, uh, Other times there are many departments that will consider you, like I said, for funding at time of application. So there are several departments on campus who like won't they just won't accept people if they don't have an assistantship to give them. It's just like and we do see that a lot in like the College of Letter Arts and Social Sciences, where maybe some of those degrees don't have as high projected earnings as other degree types do, and they say ethically, we just think that everyone who comes on should have funding, and so they will award TA-ships at the time that you're admitted, and it's just kind of a given. So, like I said, that's something that you need to talk to the department beforehand to understand how they do that. Um, and then we say right here that the process is usually included on the department's website. It's not always, but like I said, that academic program page that I put in the chat, you can at least start there. Oh, and then this is actually a good point too, is to know that sometimes the department, there are departments outside of the department that you're applying to that offer assistantships to that department. So what I mean is, for instance, our communications department, right? We need people to teach communications 101. And so the communications department has a program because they don't actually have any graduate students. And so what they've done is they have actually made agreements with other departments, and they've said, we'll offer you a couple communication TA-ships to bring people on with. And so we'll see people in like history and anthropology and English, who are kind of adjacent to communication, actually teaching some introductory communications classes to fund their history degree, right? And so that's just something to note too, that if you're that could be a good question to ask the department as well, is are there assistantships outside of your department that I could reach out to and ask about. Yeah, and then okay, reaching out to faculty. And this is a tough one, right? And I'm just gonna say right now that a lot of you may be trying to thread that needle currently, where you're trying to talk to faculty about getting funding, but you're not hearing anything back from them. I will say, and this is like a really tough conversation to have with graduate students sometimes, but it's something that I think like it's like we're not doing anyone a service by not just saying this, and that's that if you've emailed someone 5 times and they haven't emailed you back, um, it might mean that it's not the right fit. Right. And I don't like telling people that. I think it sounds really harsh, but I think it's harsher if we like lead you along, right? Faculty are very busy and sometimes they don't have funding. Or sometimes they've already located somebody else for the funding. And I think that if someone's not emailing you back, that you're reaching out to, asking these questions to, there's a good chance that for your own benefit, that's not a good sign, right? It's not a good sign in terms of the level of communication, and kind of like clearly, the relationship's not being kindled very, very well, right? And so I think that that's a good sign that if you need funding, that's not the right avenue. Now, that being said, there are certain ways you can go about it. I would say that drafting a very brief 1 to 2 paragraph email that outlines why you're interested in working with that faculty member and being a part of that department, and then clarifying that within the context of your former academic and professional skills, right? And attaching a truncated CV or resume with only relevant skills and background, right? That is how you craft an email to a faculty member. You make it brief, quick, and to the point, and you don't load it with fluff that doesn't relate to what you're asking for, right? Um, and send it out. And if you don't hear back, and say you don't hear back for like 2 weeks, it's okay to send a follow-up email then. I think that's totally fine. Um, that being said, if you do that, you send a follow-up email and then you don't hear back, that might be where it's like, and you're a month out, maybe, you know, the faculty member is just too busy, right? Um, so yeah. And then also again, I'm just gonna keep saying it, if you do all of that and you don't hear back, another good place to do to call. So we'll just use natural resources again, right? They have their graduate studies office, right? You can call them and just ask if there's anybody else that you could be in contact with. Um, all right. So let's just say you got offered one. You got offered a TA or an RA position. Um, like I said, you should read the offer letter. And also make sure you have an offer letter. Sometimes, this is just a pro tip, departments, sometimes there is just a slight disconnect between the actual graduate studies office, us, and the departments. And they will send out offers without attaching an official offer letter. Now, great. That's awesome that they gave you an offer. But I would, as quickly as possible, indicate that you need an official offer letter if one's not attached. Because before you agree, like, you throw up your hands and you say, "Woo, I'm so pumped." Absolutely, yes, yes, a million times yes. I would just be sure to get your official offer letter, read it over. Make sure you understand your hours. Make sure you understand if all of your tuition is being covered and not just tuition, right? Look and see if graduate fees are being covered. I know that was one that actually caught me off guard. I'll use a personal kind of anecdotal story here, and that is that when I did my graduate assistantship in college, I didn't realize that my tuition was covered. Um, but my graduate fees were not covered. So I was still on the hook for about $700 a semester. Um, and that one caught me off guard. My first semester, I was like, wait, I thought I got a full assistantship. Why do I still owe $700, right? And it was because, newsflash, I didn't read my entire offer letter. So I'm warning you now to read it. And that was fine. I mean, I made it work. I would have still said yes. It just I wish I had known. I wish I had planned better, right? Um, so obviously knowing what the stipend is. So some stipends, they have different pay structures. Sometimes you get stipends, particularly, and we'll get into like what fellowships are. Maybe you get on with a fellowship. Fellowships sometimes pay people out in one big lump sum payment, or they pay them out biannually, or you could be on a research assistantship or a teaching assistantship, which pay out biweekly, very similar to just a regular job. Oh, and then yeah, student fees right here, insurance. And then, okay, if you're somebody who is not from Moscow, Idaho, and you're here, so we have a huge variation of people that this program gets sent out to. So if you're someone who is not from Moscow, Idaho, and maybe you're looking at coming here, and you get an offer letter here, just run the offer against cost of living. That's one thing that Moscow, I will say that we kind of have going for us is we have a very low cost of living compared to a lot of places in the country. And so, but even though we have a relatively low cost of living, you still need to run that against how much you're offered in a stipend, right? And so I think that conversion or that ratio is something that people don't often do, right? So sometimes, like I've known people who, they get into like UCLA and they get an assistantship at UCLA, and the assistantship is for $32,000, which, as far as assistantship goes, that sounds awesome. However, you know, the cost of living in Southern California is astronomically higher than it is in Idaho, right? So you might actually do better financially on a $22,000 a year stipend in Idaho than you would on a $32,000 a year stipend in California. Now, don't quote me on that. I didn't do that math. I'm just saying that those are the kinds of considerations you need to make when you're looking at your offers. And I want this to be something that is applicable to kind of graduate funding more broadly. Like this is, if you're someone looking at lots of different places, be comparing these. If you get five different offers and UI is one of them, compare it against your four other offers. Do that conversion of cost of living versus the stipend ratio. So, and then if you have questions, ask questions. Don't feel insecure or shy about your contract. I would say that if somebody ever made you feel weird about asking questions about your contract, that is a red flag that you don't want to work with that person because that's a super toxic trait. It is something that like you are committing to it's a big thing, right? Graduate school is a huge thing. It's a huge part of people's lives. It takes years and years and years, and it's not unreasonable for you to ask every question that comes to mind when you're reading through your contract. If you do come to UI or you're at UI and you need help understanding those contracts, our office absolutely is a good starting place to come, right? The COGS office, if we can't tell you, we can get you to the office that you need to talk to help explain whatever facet of your offer letter you need, right? Whether that's HR, whether that's the individual department, right? We can help facilitate that process. So just keep us in mind. I'll drop a couple emails in the chat here at the end that you should just keep in mind throughout this whole process. Okay, external funding options. Um, grants and fellowships. That's what we're talking about. And so I would say that usually grants are not something that somebody who is not like a tenure track professor is going to be writing in any kind of like way that's large or significant enough to fund an entire graduate education. However, you may look into fellowships. And so um, fellowships can be, something that comes from a federal agency or it could be something that comes from a private donor. And they vary they're different from grants in that fellowships often pay you a stipend for your potential as a scholar, right? Versus grants that pay people money to achieve specific deliverables and aims. So for the largest fellowship that we work with here at UI, or the kind of most students that we throw in applications with, is the Graduate Research Fellowship Program through the National Science Foundation. That program awards, they're called NSF GRFPs. They award that funding based entirely off someone's potential as a future scientist. They want to see that you're the kind of scientist they want out there in the world doing research, being an academic, making an impact in the world. There is outside of just making sure you keep up in your coursework and that you are meeting the requirements of the university and your department. Not a lot. You have to do an annual report, just let them know what you're up to. But that's about it. And so that's kind of generally how a fellowship works, though. Some are a little bit different than that, but I'd say that that's kind of a pretty solid rule between difference between grant and fellowship. So I want to say that let's see here. I had a slide on. Let's see. Sorry, I'm always jumping around. I was pretty sure I had a slide on it, but maybe not. Um, okay. Well, never mind. I must have not saved it. Okay, so we have a grant and fellowship writing program here at the University of Idaho. So I've talked a little bit to people who may be outside of the university, and now I want to talk to people who might be inside the university. So this also went out to UI undergraduate students. So if you are somebody who is maybe a junior or a senior right now, and you're looking at what's called phase one fellowships. So the GRP is what is, the GRP is an example of what's called a phase one fellowship. And that is something that oftentimes undergraduate seniors can apply to fund their graduate education. So I worked with three different undergraduate seniors who turn in NSF GRPs this year, who are looking to fund their education either here or elsewhere. Totally transferable. NSF doesn't care, right? Um, and so like I kind of just said, we have a grant and fellowship initiative here in the College of Graduate Studies. And so we offer a 1 credit class in fellowship writing or a 1 credit class in grant writing. The fellowship class, glorified GRFP class. We've also worked with people who are doing Fulbrights. That's what's called a phase three fellowship. That's something that people are doing kind of later on in their graduate education, not something that would probably concern most of you. But we also work with people who um, you know, uh, uh, really, any fellowship someone brings to me, I might not know about it. And in which case, I'm not going to be as helpful, but I've never said no to one, right? If someone truly wants to go for a fellowship and they bring me the offer, they say, "Hey, I did the research, I found this solicitation, this request for proposal, and they bring it to me and they say, I want to go for it. I will never turn someone away. I will read the RFP and the solicitation, and I will do my best to help you turn that in. Right. And usually if you are someone at UI, I just ask that you enroll in our 1 credit fellowship class. If you're looking at potential grants, we also work with people in a grant writing class. It's a glorified speaker series. We have people from, NSF, NIH, nonprofits come in, talk to people about how to apply for those kinds of grants. But we also have people, I just had a student who took the class who got funded through the Idaho Humanities Council for a grant that we worked on together. We've had people turn in Honor Society fellowship grant proposals as well that have been funded, right? So those are smaller pools of money that maybe is something that you kind of maybe you get into graduate school and then you're looking for more funding. Those are good options. And I'll put in some info in the chat here about those in just a second as well. I'm really wondering where my I swear I had a whole slide about fellowships and grants. I don't know what happened to it. So um just disappeared. Okay. Scholarships and awards. Okay, another thing that you can look into is there are several funding databases out there that you can comb through for grant and fellowship opportunities. Now, Pivot ProQuest database is one that we have here at the University of Idaho. It's also one that if you are currently enrolled at a university, you likely have access to. Now, I can't tell you where it would be located if you are at a different university. I can tell you that ours, if you go to our Office of Faculty and Research Development or our Office of Sponsored Programs, they have links to it there because I think that they're the ones that kind of oversee or pay for the service. But I'm going to really quickly, I'm going to unshare my screen because I'm going to pull up Pivot really quick. If I can get it up. One second. Um, okay, so I'm gonna reshare now. Okay, can you see that, Amanda? Okay, this is Pivot right here. So you see that it's just a gigantic, right? It has all this different, $118.85 billion dollars in potential funding that you could apply for. Now, are you gonna qualify for all that? Probably not. That'd be pretty wild if somebody had $118.85 billion dollars in graduate research funding. I would say that you probably just should do that forever. But it's pretty simple. You can just type in maybe you're like in uh immunology. Man, that is so scary having to spell something in front of people. Like immunology. I'm like, I got halfway through that word and I was like, oh, that was not the right word to choose. But right here, look at so there's all of these different options come up for possible funding sources for immunology. Now, some of those are going to be postdoctoral fellowships, right? That's not something that you can necessarily apply for if you're going into graduate school, but some of it might be, right? Or maybe you're somebody who just needs funding while you're in graduate school to go travel, right? Here's a travel grant for somebody who might be interested in going to a conference on immunology, right? So that's one resource that we have. I'm going to put a link to that in the chat right now. Um, just UI folks, if you um, let's see here, put that in there. Yeah. And then, like I said, if you're somebody at like another university and you're like not sure where that lives, a really good place to start would be your Office of Sponsored Programs or your Office of Research and Faculty Development, which as long as you have a university that is like somewhat research oriented, you will have something that is akin to either of those offices. So yeah, um, and also, I'm just gonna say it right now, people look down on this. Sometimes I just throw it into Google, you know? I think that like Google, it still works sometimes. I mean, you're not gonna find a ton there, but I've found some funding sources just by a good Google search, right? Maybe you can do that. Maybe you can ask ChatGPT. Maybe ChatGPT will be able to tell you. I wouldn't know. I haven't quite implemented ChatGPT into my daily life. Maybe I'm behind the times on that. But so um going on. There are some institutional scholarships that exist too. I would say this is not something I would count on necessarily to fund your entire graduate education. But we do have some internal funding options. Now, this is another thing to keep in mind once you are maybe in graduate school. There will be what are called writing fellowships or dissertation fellowships. Those are things that you can use to fund the final years of your um, graduate education, they're usually very competitive. There's only like one or two that exist across departments when they do have them. I know that for instance, in English, they have the Hemingway Fellowship, which is funding you can apply for in your final year of the creative writing program that will fund you for a year. But these are things that, oftentimes you kind of have to get in and then find out about. There are sometimes certain scholarships that are offered automatically to people who meet certain qualifications when they get into programs as well. Other sources, if you are, I'm just going to say this is something that I always outsource this to our Veteran Affairs office here on campus. If you were in the military at any point, we do accept the GI Bill. This is something that whenever people call and ask or email and ask me about this though, I will love to say I always refer them to our veterans office because it's not something I want to make promises about that I don't know, right? And it's not a process that I know much about. But I do know that oftentimes we do have several students who are attending graduate school here on the GI Bill. So just something to keep in mind. Okay. Um, I'm going to always say to be a little bit wary of loans, in particular private loans. I'd say that if you're going to do them, like I said, weigh that return on investment that you're going to get from the degree. Borrow responsibly and be very wary of any private lenders. We've known people who've gotten in trouble with that, and just would hate to see anybody kind of be taken advantage of in a predatory way. And I will say if you have to do it, just the best way to do it is just filling out the FAFSA and going through the federal government with them. That's probably the most flexible loan term that you're going to get. And yeah, really the only source that we endorse. I mean, it's not really an endorsement, but it's like if you have to do it, just fill out the FAFSA. Right. Don't go through some random bank. I would say that's probably just not the smartest way. There are other things available to you. And then just yeah, like I'll just say it again. Just be sure that you understand the kind of return that you're going to get from the degree and the path you're taking before you take them out. So yeah. Um, let's see here. Oh, and then also I have right here, this is information on our financial aid office. We'll put their email in the chat here in just a moment. Or actually, I'll probably send it out with the email after this presentation. So that's generally that's a broad overview to funding at the graduate level, all the different ways you can do it. Here's my contact information, and there is also the link to that graduate programs page. I'm going to send these slides and a recording of this presentation out after this meeting. But I wanted to end about 15 minutes early because I wanted to field questions that folks have. I'm going to stop sharing right now. Um, Okay, so I have a couple here in the chat that were sent to me directly, and I can answer those in a minute. But does anybody have any questions they want to ask out loud?
I do.
Yeah,
Are there
Laura,
any TA or RA positions available for online graduate students?
I'm glad you asked this. Actually, that was one of the other questions in the chat. Um, it has happened. Uh, I would say that you have to be it would that there's nothing available if you're international. So if you reside in the States, I have heard of some funding availability happening for online students. It's something that happens on a very case by case basis, and I have no information on it, right? And so I would say that sometimes people work near extension centers, right? And so we have many extension centers all over the state, and so people will get research assistantships that are associated with those extension centers. I have also in some cases, like in education, I've heard of people getting some online assistantships, but I don't know what the particulars of that agreement are. Like if they had some component where they were here on occasions, but were generally online. Maybe they were doing grading. I'm not really sure what the agreement was on it. And actually, I think that if you had asked me this even 6 months ago, I would have probably said we don't do that. But I did just do an orientation for our education department, and they had, I think there were two different people who were online who had some kind of an assistantship, and it kind of surprised me. So I would say that it's just something to be having a conversation with the department because ultimately they're going to make any decisions about the terms such as online or in-person format for any assistantships that they divvy out. So and we generally, I mean, I would say that like that's a pretty good rule of thumb for like any of these kind of like nuanced questions about assistantships because I always see it like COGS where I work for, we're like the federal government, right? And then the colleges themselves, they're like the states, and so and we have a structure where like we just want to be broad oversight. We don't want to tell departments what they can and can't do unless it directly violates some sort of institutional policy. So I would just say like whatever department you're interested in, use that index I put in there, get a hold of their graduate department, have a conversation with either a faculty member or someone who works in their administrative office. So yeah, so sorry to be a little bit vague about that. I would say like not impossible, just a conversation you need to have with the department. Yeah. We have a RIM.
Yes, I had a question. What about the 4+1 programs? Is that also kind of considered under you guys' office and like the grants and like all that scholarship? Is that similar to how you would do like a full-on master's or a PhD program?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So the 4+1 program, for anyone out there who doesn't know what the 4+1 program is, that is a program where if you are a UI undergraduate student, you can get what's called seamless enrollment, which is where you have no break in your enrollment between your undergraduate and your graduate education. You add one extra year of study, academic year of study, to your program, and you are able to get a master's degree, an undergraduate degree, and a master's degree in 5 years, and you do it for the same price that you're paying for undergraduate tuition. All right. Um, Now that being said, most of those programs, there is no, um, uh, there is no rule that says you can't have one. However, most of those programs are what's called non-thesis professional programs, and non-thesis professional programs have far less funding associated with them than research-based thesis programs, right? It's where you actually complete a proper thesis project. Now, that being said, I'm gonna note here the reason why a lot of people do the 4+1 program. Yes, it can be because they just want to get the master's degree out of the way. Other people do it because it's a really good way to seamlessly, in an expedited way, get into a graduate program that can then you can like kind of get your foot in the door and then get into a PhD program. So a 4+1, I wouldn't necessarily associate it with funding in and of itself, but it might be a good way to then get that funding for a research-based program. Does that make sense? I always think it's kind of like it can be a really good strategy tool if you're somebody who hasn't necessarily made that contact with the department and you're just like, but you know that you have like the GPA and you have the certain classes and you technically have sufficed all the requirements for that expedited process. You can get in seamlessly to a program and then you can maybe dovetail into a funded program. And in the meantime, you're still just paying the undergraduate tuition rates, right? So you're not paying the kind of increased graduate fee structure. So it can be kind of an economic way. Some people do it like they'll take non-degree classes or something, but I think the 4+1 can be a great way to kind of get your foot in the door as well. Um, so yeah, uh, I would say no policy against it. I haven't seen a lot of people with 4+1 have funding, but I have seen people do 4+1 and then get funding going into another program, is what I'd say. So yeah. Um, so okay, we have one in the chat. I'm gonna kind of answer a couple in the chat. Let's see here. one person was wondering if you're a student UI, can we get assistantship at another university like WSU? Yeah, you just have to apply to WSU. I mean, we don't have any like joint programs through WSU, but we like people go to the University of Idaho and then they transfer to other programs all the time. It's very common. In fact, I'd say yeah, a lot of people do that. Okay, and then we have another one since graduate. So basically, the question is, can you get funding for graduate certificates alone? I would say probably not. Uh, I have never heard personally of someone getting funding to do a graduate certificate in and of itself. People are often enrolled in the certificates alongside another program, in which case, yes, right? So like, I know that like, CNR, College of Natural Resources, has many certificate programs people are doing in conjunction with their degree while they're also getting while they're also doing an assistantship. So yes, you could have one in that case, but for a certificate alone, probably not. And then, um, is it a must to secure an advisor or supervisor before you can get admitted to a graduate assistantship? That is a great question that I should have covered in more depth. I think is good for anybody who's still here. You don't need, there's no rule that says you have to have a graduate advisor locked down before you apply to get funding. Now, that being said, it sure does help if you do, right? If you have talked to a faculty advisor and even just had a conversation about being interested in working with them, and they can advocate for you when you turn in your application, good. It's a good thing to have done. I always suggest making contact with a potential faculty advisor prior to applying for graduate school, especially if you want funding, right? So yes, that's how I'd look at that. And then, are there any resources, example emails, for to write, for faculty funding? We don't have any like in template form. If you're really concerned, I'm gonna put my email in the chat right now for folks who are still here. This is my personal email. Happy to help you draft a quick email. If you want to like send me some language and you were just curious if that works, feel free to send me an email. Always, I've seen a million of them. I could probably give you some decent advice on that. Yeah, and then I also want to make sure that we get in, let's see here. Actually, you know what? Any other resources I will send. We recorded this session. We're gonna send it out to everybody who registered, and any of the links in here, I'll be sure to include them in that email. Do we have any other questions before we um let's see. I would say the application fee waiver generally cannot be waived. I think there are certain exceptions where it does, but that's something that you'd have to take up with either usually the department, to be honest. And I honestly would not lead with that. I would let them offer you one. I would not ask for one. It oftentimes comes off as I hate to say it, but it can come off a little bit annoying to them sometimes. And it also is, and this sounds again, I just want to be very transparent with people. Application fee waivers can be seen as a way to judge who is serious about applying sometimes, right? And it's almost like a weed out type thing because so many people want those waivers. So many people want to apply to as many programs as possible. And so actually programs and our institution even can use the application fee waiver of just kind of weeding out people who aren't the most serious about our program, right? Now that being said, every now and then there are some on, certain on a case by case basis, application fee waivers may be granted. Yeah. So, yeah. Any other questions for me? You can always, like I said, shoot me an email, and I will send this out. And thank you all so much for coming, and good luck in your graduate programs. So, all right, see you everybody.